Internal orbital collapse, the recursive vortex of the inverted self. Internal orbital collapse does not begin with abandonment, it begins with idealization. The subject, psychologically structured around internal lack, enters the shared fantasy, not as a participant, but as a redeemer. This redeemer self is animated by the narcissist's libidinal gaze, a gaze that does not see, but scans, does not hold, but idealizes. The false self of the victim begins to shape around this idealization. It's not pathological yet. It is animated by longing, seduction, and the promise of repair. But it is not the real self. It is constructed under the conditions of untruth. It is the idealized Redeemer self. The longer the gaze is sustained, the more the survivor begins to believe in this constructed self. And when the gaze shifts, when the narcissist devalues or withdraws, the collapse begins. But not as grief, not yet. It begins as confusion, a faltering in self perception, a low, buzzing recognition that something in the fantasy is no longer stable. This is the first orbit, a turn around the centre that has disappeared, a spin without gravity, and the survivor does not exit. They spin faster. Once the shared fantasy begins to rupture, the subject does not exit. They fracture. The false self protector, originally an adaptive shield, becomes dominant. It speaks in interjected voices: self blame, guilt, longing, shame, failure. Each motion loops into the next. The psyche tries to understand the collapse, but understanding requires a stable subject, and there is none. The self becomes distributed across competing object relations. One part still longs for the idealized object, one part rages at the betrayal, one part seeks to repair, one part grieves, and one part watches. But none of these are integrated. They form a splintered ego constellation, each spinning around the black hole of the vanished fantasy. Meaning collapses because meaning was borrowed from the gaze, from the fantasy, from the narcissist. Now the orbit accelerates, and with every revolution, the survivor tries to extract truth from illusion and suffers further fragmentation in the process. Recursive rumination and libidinal gravity. At this stage, the subject is caught in recursive thought, but this is not ordinary rumination. This is libidinal recursion. Each loop carries affective charge, a pull towards hope, a pull towards annihilation. These are not memories, these are psychic simulations, false replays trying to resolve the unresolvable. Each memory carries two poles: libidinal, but I loved them, maybe it was real. The anti libidinal, they destroyed me, I hate them. The orbit becomes a closed circuit of activation. The survivor can no longer tell which voice is theirs. The narcissist has become internalized. The introject is now a ghost conductor, managing affective tone from within. And the survivor, seeking relief, thinks more. They try to solve the collapse through cognition. But thinking is the orbit, and each revolution drains more psychic fuel. The silent gravity, inverse mirrored reflexive apathy, and the collapse of meaning. The final stage of collapse is the dominance of IMRA. This is not felt as pain, it is felt as emptiness. IMRA is the symbolic executor of the death drive. It mimics relational contact while withdrawing all affective resonance. It answers hope with blankness. It answers grief with silence. It answers rage with fog. The subject becomes derealized. Time distorts. Somatic symptoms increase. But they are not understood as trauma. They are seen as failure. The survivor believes something is wrong with me. They do not realize the internal object world has been inverted. Their affective system has been co opted. The central ego is now spinning without access. This is psychic inversion, not because the survivor is narcissistic, but because they've been structured around a gaze that never saw them. the self splits again and the center collapses. There is only orbit. If the internal orbit collapse represents the fragmentation and derealization of the self, then recovery is not about catharsis or insight alone. Recovery is about slowing the orbit. It is about rebuilding a center of gravity inside the psyche where authorship can once again occur. This is not a return to the past self. The self is gone. It is the reconstruction of a narrative anchor inside the wreckage, a place from which the survivor can begin to witness the orbit without being spun by it. So, step one, locating the witness, the truth self, silenced by IMRA's dominance. It is still present. It is never destroyed, only muted. In input terms, the truth self is the only part of the psyche not generated by the narcissist gaze. It is the survivor's internal witness, the origin point of symbolic authorship. Recovery begins when this part speaks, not to the world, but to the internal orbit. I see what's happening. I am watching from within. This internal witnessing is not the end of collapse, it is the beginning of resistance to the recursive pull. Step 2, libidinal reclamation. The second stage of reconstitution is libidinal restoration, not to the narcissist, but to the self. Each loop of the orbit has drained psychic energy, all of it directed outward, toward the object, the fantasy, the ideal, the failure, the absence. This is why survivors are exhausted. Even after years of no contact, the psychic fuel has been redirected not to survival, but to recursive looping. Recovery begins when libidinal force is rebound to the self. This is not affirmation, this is narrative ignition. Revoking the gaze. The third step is the symbolic revocation of the narcissist gaze. It begins when the survivor realizes the narcissist is no longer watching, but I am still performing as if they are. This is the final residue of the shared fantasy. The survivor's psyche shaped itself around a gaze that never truly saw them, and now they must withdraw consent from that gaze, continued control. Each time the survivor notices himself, self monitoring, withholding emotion, doubting memories, performing healing, they ask, who is the gaze? This internal question weakens inverse mirrored reflexive apathy, and the survivor begins to step outside the structure, not because it no longer spins, but because they no longer believe it is real. Authorship does not mean clarity, it means agency, to write a story, even through fragmentation, to hold a feeling, even through contradiction, to say, yes, I still think about them, yes, I still loop, but I am not just the looping, I am the one who sees it, I am the one still here. This is not healing as imagined by culture, this is reconstitution, the slow, brutal rebuilding of an I. Internal object collapse is not a metaphor. It is a clinical, symbolic reality in survivors of mirrored psychic inversion. It is recursive, structural, affective, and neurosymbolic, but it is not final. The spiral is not a tomb, it is a tunnel, and at the center of that tunnel, if the survivor can hold on long enough through each loop, each voice, each false self, and each silent scream, they may not find the person that was once there, but the only one who was ever real. I thought I would die if I stopped thinking about them, but I didn't. I was born. Peace out. Loads of love.